أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Inshallah you're doing well. We will continue inshallah with our sessions. As you may have probably seen on our flyers, for our ahkam sessions, or the sessions that I was taking your time, this week inshallah will be the last week before inshallah we prepare for the month of Ramadan coming up. We will inshallah continue with this topic sometime later on, probably after the month of Ramadan, but for the month of Ramadan we are planning something special, that we could capitalize on the presence that's there always in the month of Ramadan. So in the previous sessions we had moved all the way up to this part of the discussion about salat. We started, if you guys remember, from the conditions of salat. We went through all the different conditions, the clothing, the place in which I'm going to pray, all of that kind of stuff. Then from there we moved on to the wajibat of prayer, and we discussed basically every single part of salat. What is wajib, what is mustahab? There were many things, if you remember, that were actually mustahab, that growing up we may have been taught that they are actually wajib. And we also discussed the secrets behind a number of these actions that we have in our salat, right? So for example, we talked about the idea that when we start out our prayer, why is it that we're supposed to say takbiratul ihram? Why is it that it's mustahab to say takbiratul ihram 7 times? That's another thing we discussed, right? All the different parts of salat, we went through each one of them, and then we also delved into the ahadith and what the ahadith have to say about the secrets of each one of these parts of salat. And we basically covered quite a bit until we moved on from the different parts of salat, and I believe it was last week that we covered tashahhud and salam, and we moved on to now what we call the mubtilat of salat. Let me just pull up my notes real quick. Yes, so we moved on to the mubtilat of salat. What is a mubtil? A mubtil means something that you would do that would invalidate your prayer. Your prayer would no longer be correct. I don't say accepted, because when you sit with the scholars, they will tell you that there's a difference between our salat being correct and our salat being accepted, right? When they speak of salat being accepted, they're talking about this extra level of this next level basically of requirements that there is for your salat to now be accepted. So what they say is that the first step is that your prayer has to be correct, meaning at the very beginning it should have the basic fundamentals of a proper prayer, a proper salat, right? But then you have to add certain extra requirements for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to quote unquote accept it, right? We have this concept of the qabul of our a'mal, and it's not there just for salat, it's there for other things as well, right? So but when you sit with the scholars and they speak of this idea of your salat being accepted, they say that this acceptance of the prayer, it shows itself by delivering the spiritual effect of the prayer to the individual who is delivering the prayer, right? So that's the difference. There might be a lot of people, and in fact there are a lot of people, and the majority of us would fall under this category, where our prayers are correct, but they're not accepted, in the sense that the spiritual effect of that prayer does not show itself, it does not manifest itself in our day-to-day lives, right? So that's why when you go to the ahadith, they say, for example, that only the part of your salat is accepted that you were paying attention in, like only the part where you had a presence of mind when you were praying. That's the only part that's accepted from your prayer. In other words, that's the only part of your salat that will show and will have that spiritual effect that you're actually looking for. Which spiritual effect? The spiritual effect of inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar, that effect that is supposed to forbid us from doing haram, right? The spiritual effect that as-salatu mi'rajul mu'min, that it's the ascension of a mu'min, that the mu'min ascends towards the skies while he is in his prayer. The spiritual effect that it purifies you from the sins that we have committed. These are all spiritual effects that the prayer has to be accepted in order for it to have these spiritual effects. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that point as a general condition, as a general point, and an introduction to what we want to go through today, just so that we're on the same page. That when we talk about a prayer, I'll be using these terms a little loosely, in the sense that, let's say it this way: from now on, when we say your prayer is not correct or it's invalid, we mean that the prayer doesn't have the fundamental conditions, right? But when we speak of your prayer being accepted or not being accepted, that's that second level that I just explained, that has to do with the spiritual level of things. So what we're discussing has to do with the idea of at least having our salat correct. Because if our salat is not correct, then that spiritual effect of it doesn't even come to that, right? Because prayer has to be carried out in a specific manner and in a specific way. Yes, we can always talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but our prayer has to be done in a specific way. I'll mention a very short story very quickly before I go through a review of what we discussed in our previous sessions. Because I remember growing up, we had a relative, and this relative of ours, and I'm going off, off the topic for just a second. But this relative of ours, I remember I used to sit down with her, and in family gatherings and stuff like that, much older than me, and I remember sitting down with her, and she used to say, it's very important for us to pray, it's very important for us to speak to God and all that stuff, but it's important not to become rigid, right? It's important not to become so close-minded. And so growing up, I didn't know what that meant. What does she mean by being so rigid and close-minded and stuff like that? So I asked her a couple times. I was like, what do you mean by being close-minded and rigid and stuff like that? And she was like, you know how these shuyukh, they make it so difficult. They say that if you don't do your prayer in this way, all of a sudden your prayer is not accepted, or it's not correct. And if you don't do it that way, like you have to do wudu, and you have all these conditions, right? They're so rigid, they're so close-minded, right? So I remember I asked her, I said, well, how do you do things then? Like if you're not close-minded like that, based on what she was saying. I was like, well, how do you do things then? She said, oh no, I just sit here. And she had a chair that she used to sat on. It was like this specific chair in the house. It's like, I just sit on this chair and I speak to God and I talk to God. I don't need to I don't need to get up and pray and stuff like that, right? So the point I was making by sharing that story with you guys is that if someone's prayer is not correct, the discussion of whether it's quote-unquote accepted or not doesn't even come into the picture, right? Because your prayer doesn't even have the fundamentals for it to go to the next level of it having that spiritual effect. Okay, so let me do a quick review. Assalamu alaikum to all the brothers and sisters who are with us. Nice to have you guys with us. So quick review of what we discussed the previous week. We started from tashahhud. For those who weren't with us last week, we mentioned tashahhud is after the second sajda. The second sajda was supposed to symbolize us being resurrected. So when you get up from the second sajda, naturally what comes afterwards? It's qiyamat, and it's the day of everyone is being accounted for, basically. So tashahhud, the things that we say in tashahhud are the things that will manifest themselves on Yawmul Qiyamah. Therefore we say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. There's no God, he has all the power. That will manifest itself on Yawmul Qiyamah. Wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad. These are things that will manifest themselves on the day of judgment, right? And we shared some ahadith in this regard. We mentioned that with regards to tashahhud, there isn't much rulings that we have to cover. It is mustahab that when you're sitting, that the right foot is on the left foot, and that at the end of the first tashahhud, someone could say, وَتَقَبَّلْ شَفَاعَتَهُ وَارْفَعْ دَرَجَتَهُ. For those who don't know, this simply means, Ya Allah, accept the intercession, the shafa'at of the Prophet, right? وَارْفَعْ دَرَجَتَهُ, and elevate his status. That's basically what it means. Okay, we moved on to salam. We said, what's the idea behind salam? Basically, and we shared, I think like 3 or 4 different ahadith in this regard, but I'll just give you a brief summary. We said the reason why salam is called salam, or we have salam at the very end of our prayer, is because salam, of course, means peace, right? Islam literally, it doesn't mean peace. It has a different meaning. Islam literally means when you submit to something, right? But salam actually means peace. So the reason why you have quote unquote peace at the end of your prayer is because now you are in peace from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? You are immune to the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why this word salam, it's used over and over again in the verses of the Quran and the ahadith. Anytime they want to give someone the feeling that you have nothing to worry about from me, like I'm not going to hurt you, nothing bad is going to come your way from me, they would use the word salam. Complete peace, complete immunity, right? That's why the angels, when people enter into heaven, these angels welcome them with what? Salamun alaykum tibtum. Salamun alaykum means there's peace. There's nothing for you to worry about here, right? And that's basically the idea behind us saying salam, right? Or like in the verses of the Quran, we have that people who are in heaven, they hear the call of God every now and then saying salamun, right? And it says qawlan min rabbin rahim. This is the speech of a merciful Lord for them. Right. Okay, so that's what salam means, and that's the reason behind salam. Okay, I give my salam. The one important thing to remember here is that from the 3 salams that we give, 2 of them are mustahab. There's only one that is wajib, and that is the last one that we mentioned. So, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, that's the last one that is wajib. And this was all legislated for the Prophet when he went to Mi'raj. Hadith says he was in Mi'raj and he prayed, and then he saw the angels, and he was ordered and commanded to send his salam to these angels and these prophets that had gathered around him, and that turned into the salam that we have today. Okay, we said moving on from that, there are certain taqibat. I'm not going to go into detail. You can do sajdat al-shukr, you can do tasbihat of Lady Fatima. We discussed these in detail last week, and we mentioned that beautiful hadith in which the Prophet says that the best thing you can do is tasbih of Lady Fatima. If there was anything better than that, وَلَوْ كَانَ شَيْءٌ أَفْضَلَ مِنْهُ لَنَحَلَهُ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ مِنْ فَاطِمَةٍ. If there was anything better, the Prophet would have gifted that thing to his daughter. We all know the story of how tasbihat of Lady Fatima came into existence, basically. So this is up until the end of Salat. We moved on to the invalidators of our prayer. Okay, so we're going to start here. First invalidator of our prayer, I believe we have about 8 or 9. So some of them we covered. I'm just going to review real quick, and we're going to move on to the new ones. First one was, obviously, if you lose one of the conditions of prayer. This one is really difficult, and we're not going to go into detail about it because we discussed the conditions of prayer before. One thing that I will mention is this, that always, it's a general principle so that you can always have it in your pocket, basically, and use it whenever you need to. Whenever you find out that the wudu that you had was incorrect, you messed up your wudu, basically, right? And you prayed, you will always have to make up for your prayer. That's a general rule. Okay. Second invalidator is, we grouped these 2 together. One was takattuf, basically, like our brothers from Ahlus Sunnah do. And the second one is also saying Ameen after Suratul Hamd. Why? Because we don't have hadith telling us that you're supposed to do these things in your prayer. So when someone does them and says, hey, I'm doing this as part of my prayer, this is a problem, right? Now, if you don't do it with the intention that this is part of your prayer, there's a discussion amongst the scholars. Some of them say it's okay, some of them say no, it's not okay. There's a discussion, right? But one thing we know for sure is that if someone does them as thinking to themselves or believing that this is mustahab, no, within our school of thought, this salat is not considered valid, because we don't have hadith within the Shia school of thought that this was prescribed. And salat is something that you need a prescription for every little part of it, right? Because every part of it has to be dictated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why we have hadith. The Prophet turned to his people. He said, Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. You guys pray the way you saw me praying, right? Because every detail of it needs to be prescribed. Either, I'm just going to put this fiqhi point out there, this jurisprudential point out there. Now, either this prescription has to be a specific prescription. For example, this is just an example. I'm making this up just for the sake of the example, right? Like when you get up from the third rak'ah, say like Allahu Akbar, for example, right? Okay, it's for a specific time and place in your prayer. So either you have a prescription to say Allahu Akbar in that particular time and space like that, or you have a general prescription. For example, we have general prescription in salat that yes, you can say dhikr in any part of your salat. So I can, even if I'm like going to sajda, for example, on my way to sajda, I can say Alhamdulillah, but I can say with the intention that this is a general dhikr. Why? Because we have general prescription for doing dhikr in our salat, basically. Okay. So that was number 3 and 4. Number 5 is turning away from the qibla. We said if you turn away from the qibla on purpose, even a little bit, that's a problem. Yes, if it's not on purpose, then up to 90 degrees is okay. And number 5, we moved on to talking in prayer. This is where we ended, and I'm going to inshallah continue with our discussion from here. Let me just check to see if we have any questions. Assalamu alaikum to everyone else who joined us. Yes, Brother Hamid is asking, Salam wa alaikum salam. Are you taking any questions? I don't know if the any in capital means regarding this topic or any other topics. If it has to do with prayer, then we can take those. Okay, so let's move on to the next invalidator. The next invalidator is speaking in prayer. Okay, so obviously we know that if someone speaks on purpose, this is a problem. Why? Because salat is supposed to be a time where you talk to God. And that's why there is also a debate for situations where you might want to speak to someone else around you in prayer, right? When I say debate, there's a discussion with regards to this. So I'm going to get to that in just a second. So what we know for a fact is, number 1, if I speak to someone else on purpose, obviously my prayer is invalid. If I do it accidentally, we know that it is okay, right? What I do have to do is 1 sajdatus sahwa, which we explained previously. And then you go to sajda twice, you do a tashahud and a salam right after your prayer is over, right? That's what sajdatus sahwa is. Okay, so if I want to speak to someone else in prayer, what can I do? Now, obviously, I'm not going to sit there and just like call someone up on my phone or something, right? What happens is sometimes you want to communicate with someone else. You want to tell them something. You want to say, oh, watch the baby. You want to say, like, I don't turn off the lights, open the door, whatever the case may be in your prayer. Maybe you want to tell them to give you a torba, for example, right? Whatever the case may be, the question is, in these situations, how can I communicate with individuals, okay? Can I speak normally and say, please give me the torba? Of course not, right? But can I say a dhikr? Can I say Allahu Akbar? Can I say Alhamdulillah to communicate my point to that person, right? According to Ayatollah Sistani, yes, this is allowed as long as you say that phrase with the intention that, I'm saying dhikr, right? But on the side, I'm also communicating with this person. So if you do say it that way, it's fine. What you can also do is just gestures and stuff like that. Clapping hands, or like, I don't know, snapping or some things like that. Those are also allowed. Or if you're already doing a dhikr, if you basically say it out loud, for example. Like you're going to, you're going to sajda anyways. You say, or forgive me, not going to sajda, but like let's say you're getting up from ruku, and the Sami Allah, you say it out loud so that like, people in the house hear it. That's fine. You can do that as well. Okay. Yes, and that's why we have hadith actually from the sixth Imam. He was asked that if someone is in prayer and he needs something, يريد الحاجة فقال يومئ برأسه, he can shake his head or make gestures with his head or his face. ويشير بيده, or he can point. والمرأة إذا أرادت الحاجة وهي تصلي تصفق بيدها. She can basically clap, not clap like a lot. We're going to get to that, what things you will do in your prayer that will make your whole prayer invalid. If you have a lot of movement in your prayer, or you alter the form and the shape of prayer, we'll get to that in just a second. But if it's a little bit, then that's fine. Okay, along those lines, I would just want to mention this, that we mentioned that sometimes we have some general prescriptions in our prayer. One of those general prescriptions is dua. You can do dua at any given point of your salat, okay? And it can be any dua. Only point is it has to be in Arabic, except for qunut. When it comes to qunut, if you guys remember, that's completely fine to do it also in Farsi or in any language. It's a Farsi, any language that you might be speaking. I'm not sure if most of our audience are Farsi speaking brothers and sisters, maybe even English, I don't know, but you can do it in any language, but outside of qunut, no, it would have to be in Arabic. Okay. And the last point that I'm going to mention is repeating the phrases in salat or repeating certain parts of hamd and surah just for ihtiyat is allowed. I've had this question asked a couple times where people say, like, can I repeat, a certain phrase? If I repeat it, would that create a problem? And the answer is no, unless you're having multiple doubts, which means you are kathir al-shak, and you should not be basically... you should basically be ignoring your doubts at that point. Okay. Now, the second discussion that we need to have right here is responding to salam when you are praying. So I'm going to cover this very quickly and we're going to move on. What am I supposed to do when someone comes into the room and says salamun alaikum? Okay. Or like I'm praying in the masjid, someone walks into the masjid and says, and this is something that happens very often, and unfortunately, I would have to say that 80% of the time, people don't even know what to do. Okay, and there's two mistakes that people make in this regard, and I'll cover both of those. Okay, so we said you can't speak to anyone in prayer. This guy comes and says salam. What am I supposed to do in that situation? Okay, so here's the thing. We'll discuss this, and then we'll also talk about responding to salam even outside of prayer. But inside of prayer, someone comes and says salam. What am I supposed to do? It's a very, I don't know if you've seen anyone in that situation before, but their blood pressure rises very quickly because they don't know what to do in that particular situation, right? So here's what you need to do. If someone comes in and says salam, the first thing that you have to ask yourself is this. First of all, was he giving salam to me or not? There are times where a person might come in, you don't see the person, he's behind you, he comes into the masjid, he says salamun alaikum out loud. You don't know if he was saying salam to you or he was saying salam to some other brother or sister who was sitting beside you, or whatever the case may be. Now, why is this important? Because when you are in prayer, you are not supposed to speak to anyone unless you are sure they were giving salam to you. So if you say salam and you're not even sure if they were giving salam to you, your prayer becomes batil, right? Because you spoke in your prayer. Well, you say, oh, but I was responding to the salam, but you don't even know if they were giving salam to you or not. So when you're in prayer, first thing to figure out is, are they giving salam to me? Okay, that's question number one. Number two is this, that even if they are giving salam to you, you should wait a little bit to see if anyone else responds to their salam. Let's say, for example, you wait for a second or two and someone else responds to their salam. If someone else responds to their salam, then again, you should not be giving salam because you are speaking at a time that it's not wajib, therefore invalidating your prayer once again. So that's point number 2. These are the 2 mistakes that I was mentioning people make, okay? Third thing is that when that person gives salam to you in prayer, you are supposed to respond exactly the way he gave his salam. So if he says salamun alaikum, you say salamun alaikum. You don't say alaikum salam. What's the reason behind this? We actually have hadith for this. I think it's I didn't bring the hadith here in my notes, but we have hadith in it. In fact, I think it was from the Prophet, or someone was narrating that the Prophet did this. That when someone came into the masjid and gave salam to the Prophet responded, or used to respond maybe even, with the exact same phrases that that person had given salam. So you will find here some of the fuqaha, or most of the fuqaha, they will say, hey, when you're giving salam back, say it exactly the way that person gave salam to you. But that's after you have established these first 2 conditions. If you have not established these 2 conditions first, then many times your prayer will become batil because you are speaking to someone when it is not wajib. What are those 2? I'm just going to mention those 2 real quick. And by the way, if you guys have questions, you can put them in the comments section. Those 2 conditions are, number 1, I am part of the people that this person was referring to when he said salam. A lot of times we can't even be sure about that because there are other people in the masjid, right? Number 2 is that you wait for a second or 2 for people to see if people will respond to the salam. If people respond to the salam, which again is something that happens a lot of times, someone else responds to the salam, you are not allowed to give salam at that point because you are speaking at a time where speaking is not wajib. Right? It's good, but in prayer, you're not allowed to speak at all unless it is wajib. So because of that, if you say salam at that point, you are speaking in prayer and therefore invalidating your prayer as well. Okay, hopefully that's clear. If it's not, then you guys can mention it and you can mention it in the comment section. Okay, let's see here. Okay, moving on, a couple rulings about responding to salam in general, not just in prayer, but outside of prayer. And this is where, in the books of our fuqaha, this is where they have discussed this issue. Even though it would make sense to have this as a separate section in, like, the risalas and the tawzihs and stuff like that. But many of the fuqaha have discussed it here. I think this should really be discussed under the social rulings of Islam. But anyways, if someone gives salam to you, what are you supposed to do? So first thing is, if someone gives salam to you, and you can't, it's a situation where that person cannot. Well, let me mention this first because this is something I've seen happen all the time. When someone gives salam, it's wajib for you to respond. Okay, even if the person is starting a speech or something like that, it's wajib for someone to respond to his salam. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is, if it's a situation where you cannot respond to his salam, let's say, for example, it's a recording. I can't hear you guys from the other side, right? A lot of you guys might be saying salam right now. I don't know. You don't have to respond because when I say salam, there's no way for you to respond to my salam. If it's a phone call, yes, of course. But if it's not like that, then you have to do that. Number 3 is that if someone is messing around and they keep saying salam, you don't have to respond to them. And number 4, and this is the point that I really wanted to cover, is that it's mustahab that someone who's riding, it's mustahab that back in the day, people who were riding were supposed to say salam to those who were walking. In other words, those who come from a little bit of a higher social class, they were encouraged to say salam first. People who are walking or they're standing up, mustahab for them to say salam to those who are sitting down, basically. And youngsters, mustahab for them to say salam to elders. This is why we have hadith that no one ever said salam to the Prophet before before he did, he always started that. Now, I'm going to move on from this, but this idea of saying salam, if you ask me, it's you could probably even consider it like it's really, really special in Islam. Just the idea that you have to respond to the salam of another person. When you look into how this affects the social gatherings that we're a part of, it plays a very big role. The idea that you can't ignore someone who's saying salam to you. So, anyways, moving on from that, I'm going to move on to laughing. When will laughing invalidate our prayer, and will it even invalidate our prayer? Assalamu alaikum to everyone else who has joined us. So if anyone has any questions regarding salat, you guys can put them down in the comment section, and we will get to them, inshallah. Okay, laughing. So according to Ayatollah Sistani, he says that if someone starts to laugh in prayer, just because they are laughing, this will not make their prayer batil, or it will not make their prayer invalid. He considers a very specific type of laughing to invalidate the prayer. Why is this important? Because again, I've seen this multiple times, and this can happen to youngsters and it can happen to adults as well, where something happens, they start to laugh a little bit, and then you'll see they'll walk away from their prayer all of a sudden. Why did you walk away? Oh, I laughed. My prayer was batil anyways. No, your prayer was not batil. So here's the thing. According to Ayatollah Sistani, you have to laugh, and you have to laugh out loud, right? Like, I mean, like LOL loud, okay? Which they call, like, you know, qahqaha, right? This idea of laughing out loud is something that rarely happens. Usually when someone is in prayer, even if the friends are trying to make this person laugh, which is not a good idea, but happens sometimes. First of all, if this person smiles, not going to make prayer batil. Second, even if he laughs, but he laughs quietly, again, it's not going to make his prayer batil. If he starts laughing out loud, that's when his prayer is going to become batil, right? Interesting, we have hadith. قال سألته عن الضحك. I believe this is from the 6th Imam. سألته عن الضحك هل يقطع الصلاة. If I am laughing in prayer, will that break my prayer? قال أما التبسم فلا يقطع الصلاة. If someone smiles, tabassum means to smile, that's not going to break the salah. وأما القهقه فهي تقطع الصلاة. But qahqaha is laughing out loud, right? I tried to look to see if we have an English equivalent for it. I wasn't able to find anything. Otherwise, I would just use, that equivalent, right? So yeah, technically, if you laugh out loud so much, if you laugh out loud to a point where people look at you and they're like, this guy's not even praying, obviously your prayer is going to be batil at that point. Okay, moving on. We're going to talk about crying now. That's another one of the invalidators, and after that we're going to move on to changing the state and the form of prayer. Let me just check to see if we have any questions. Okay, no questions. I'm going to move on. So moving on to crying. Crying is very simple. We're going to cover it very quickly. The idea is crying is going to be a problem only if it's with regards to things that have to do with this world. If someone is crying because they are in the presence of God, that is okay. But if they're crying even for something that's okay to cry for, right? Like they are crying because they lost a loved one, then that will also invalidate the prayer. Okay, so that's crying. There's not much to discuss there. I'm going to move on from that. Ayatollah Sistani says crying because of, the masa'ib of Karbala is also allowed. That wouldn't invalidate one's prayer. Okay, moving on to altering the state and the form of prayer. This is the part that we need to have a little bit of more detail about. So what do I mean when I say altering the state and the form of prayer? What we're talking about is I do something that if people were to see, they would say, no, this person is not praying. He doesn't look like someone who would be praying. Anything that leads to something like that is going to make my salat batil. It is going to invalidate my prayer. Okay. So, for example, walking around in prayer. will that create a problem in my salat? The answer is, if you're taking 1 or 2 steps here or there, that's actually okay. But if you're running a marathon in your salat, that's obviously not allowed at that point, right? Someone had asked this before, like picking up your baby or your infants, right? If it's done in a way that seems like it's part of prayer, no, it's not a problem. There's no problem in that regard. I couldn't find the hadith there. We have actually hadith about that I don't know if it was one of the imams or it was like a companion of the imam or something like that. But I remember one of our teachers, when we were discussing this lesson, actually, our teachers explained that yes, we have hadith that picking up the baby or even holding the baby in your arm in certain situations is allowed, as long as people don't say this guy's not praying anymore. Okay. Picking up something from the ground while you're in prayer, all of these are allowed, or picking up or moving to pick up turba from the ground, which we discussed in before. All of these are allowed. Yes, like the example that Ayat al-Sistani says that is not allowed is what? You can't jump up and down. Obviously, you can't do that, right? And yes, of course, if you're going to pick up something or anything like that, you have to make sure that you're still facing the qibla, and also that you stop your dhikr, whatever dhikr it is that you're saying, that you stop your dhikr as well. Okay, moving on to eating and drinking. Eating and drinking is also one of those things that invalidates prayer. But the important thing to remember here is that if someone has food stuck in their mouth, this does not constitute eating and drinking. Yes, if they start chewing on it and stuff like that, yes. But if it's just a little bit of food stuck in the mouth, right, and someone swallows it or whatever, or even removes it from their mouth, this is not going to create a problem for them. Yes, if someone, for example, has gum, they're chewing on gum, that would be a problem. Okay. Let me just see here if anyone has any questions before we move on. Okay. So we're going to end, inshallah, in just about 4 or 5 minutes. So if anyone has any questions, please send them in now while we have the time so that we can respond to them, inshallah. Okay, moving on to the last one of the invalidators of prayer, that is this, is that if you have one of those, a certain doubt in prayer that they would call a doubt that is mubtil. What is a doubt that is mubtil? A doubt that is mubtil is a doubt that if you have that doubt, it will make your prayer batil. Now, here is one of the most misunderstood rulings that we have in all of prayer, in all of salat, okay? And that is this. What are these doubts that if you have them, your prayer is batil? For example, they say any doubts that you have in the raka'at, for example, when it comes to prayers that have 2 rakats or prayers that have 3 rakats in them. In other words, you're praying Fajr, you don't know which rakat you are, right? That's a doubt that will make your prayer batil. Okay, now there's a very, very important point here. So stay with me, because that's the point that I'm about to make is very important, okay? So like I said, it's very, very much misunderstood, okay? Or if I'm, for example, in a 3 rakats prayer, I don't know, is this my second rakat or third rakat? Or is it my first rakat or my second rakat? They say automatically what happens? Your prayer becomes batil. Now this is correct, but here's the thing. This is only the case if you think about it and one of these 2 rak'ats does not seem more likely for you. One more time. This idea that you have this doubt, and when you have this doubt your salat will become batil, is only if you think about which rakat you're actually in and it remains a 50-50 decision for you. In that case, yes, then your 2 rakat prayer or your 3 rakat prayer is going to be batil. But 99% of the time, doesn't work like that. 99% of the time, you very much know I'm probably in my first rakat. This feels like my second rakat, right? So this idea of these doubts creating making your namaz invalid is only the case if you sit and you think and the doubt does not go away, in the sense that neither of the two sides is even more likely than the other side, which pretty much never happens. So the reason why I'm emphasizing this is not just with regards to the doubts that make your prayer batil, but with regards to all of the doubts that we have in the rak'ats of prayer. If any of you guys have looked into this, obviously you've heard of some rulings that are quite confusing, right? If you have a doubt between 3, 4, and 5, if you have a doubt between 4 and 2, if you have a doubt between 1 and all these different numbers, all of these are if you think and you can't reach a conclusion. When I say conclusion, I mean at least one side being more likely, which I said pretty much never happens, right? As far as I know, anytime you think one of the two sides is more likely, if that's what happens, then you take that side and you continue with your prayer. So this whole section of doubts in the raka'at of prayer, you really don't have to know too much about it, right? Even when we discuss it later, you'll see we'll be very brief in how we discuss the questions or the rulings in that regard. Okay. So we have two questions here. Sister Uzma is asking, if someone has chewing gum in their mouth but not actually chewing it while in prayer, what's the ruling? Well, don't tell your children, but I think from what we picked up actually from the rulings of Ayat al-Sistani, that would not create a problem for your salat. Why? Because that's not considered eating or drinking, right? Now, in his ruling, the reason why I'm saying this is in his ruling, when he talks about the idea of food being stuck in the mouth and someone swallowing it in the middle of prayer, he also adds that, like, if someone adds, a sugar cube. Now, obviously, this wouldn't apply to us in the same way. I mean, the example is obviously it was an Iranian who was coming up with this example. But anyways, he says if you put a sugar cube, like you have a sugar cube in your mouth and it just sits there and it starts to melt while you're praying, he says that doesn't create a problem for your salat and for your prayer, right? So I don't see how gum would be any different. Yes, if someone is chewing, then obviously that would create a problem. Okay, and second question, if anyone else has questions, send them in now because we're ending in like just about 2 or 3 minutes. Sister Sharmeen is asking, when someone says salam in a group chat, is it wajib on us to reply? Unfortunately, yes, it is wajib to reply. But what you can do is you can wait to see if anyone else will reply, right? And then the other thing is, responding to someone who says salam has a specific time. Responding to someone who says salam is a wajib fawri. You have to respond to them back, right there and then, right? When I say right there and then, I mean within like a couple seconds or something like that. And in different situations, it'll be different. In a group chat, you can respond to someone in like half an hour, and people are like, oh yeah, he's responding to his salam, right? But all of this is urfi based on the way people see it. But yes, the general idea is that if someone says salam in a group chat, yes, you would have to respond to their salam, unless, like, for example, the discussion is completely moved on. And that's like, for example, you were with someone, they said salam to you. For whatever reason, you didn't say salam back. Maybe you forgot, for example, right? And the discussion moved on. Now, after half an hour, you're not going to say all of a sudden in the middle of your discussion, salam alaikum. Like, it's weird, right? Because the time of salam has passed. Once the time of salam has passed, then you don't have to really respond to the salam anymore at that point. Brother Nabil is asking, Salaam alaikum salam. Can one recite dua in a language other than Arabic in qunut? Yes. So we covered this before in qunut. Yes, you can do dua in any language that someone likes to do dua in. And the other question was also, can you elaborate on the ruling of responding to one's mother/father during prayer? If a mother or a father calls, if it's an emergency, then obviously you run, as would be the case with anyone else. And if it's not an emergency, then you wait until after the prayer. As far as I've seen, there is no specific ruling when it comes to a mother or a father calling during prayer. Just the ruling that we have for everyone else. Only difference is after prayer, whatever the mother or father said you have to do. With others, you don't really have to do it. You get a choice. With mothers and fathers, you don't really get a choice, right? Although there is, of course, a discussion as to there are some times where a mother or father might ask for something that is not correct, it's not valid, it's not allowed even in Islam and all that stuff. So granted, all that stuff is there, but for the most part, you have to basically obey the mother and father, unless, and I'll mention this just very quickly before we end, unless someone is responding to their or obeying their mother or father in a situation where doing what their mother or father is asking them to do will bring significant harm into their life, right? For example, if a mother or father says, you have to choose this type of career, and this person knows that he's going to be terrible at that career, right? I'm giving you an extreme situation. Let's say my father says, you have to become a medical doctor, right? And I know I'm going to be horrible at being a medical doctor. Why? Because I'm afraid of blood, right? I'm not, but I'm just saying for the sake of the example. Well, I know this is going to ruin my life and my career. What type of medical doctor am I going to be if I'm going to faint every time I see blood? Or like my blood pressure falls every time I see blood, right? So if it's something like that, then obeying the mother and father is not going to be wajib, but those are of course, very rare situations. Okay, so that's all we had for today. We have reached the end of the invalidators of prayer. One very important question that I have from all of the brothers and sisters watching, please take a moment and let us know right now in the comment section. You can type this as I'm speaking right now. For the month of Ramadan, would you prefer to continue with the topic of salat and the rulings of salat? Because we can move on to jama'at prayer and we can move on to qada prayer and other rulings in that regard. Would you prefer that? Or do you guys think or prefer to do tafsir of the Quran because it's the month of Ramadan? Just let us know, and this will help. And this is just regarding my own sessions. Shaykh Amin will have his own sessions. But for me personally, that will help us, inshallah, engaging which way to go. So hopefully, as I'm ending, you guys will let us know right now in the comment section. Would you prefer to continue with the rulings, or would you prefer, inshallah, to move on to the tafsir of the Quran? Probably the tafsir of Surah Yasin, which is usually a surah that most people recite and we're very familiar with. So please do let us know about that. Inshallah, tomorrow Shaykh Amin will be with you guys. We do have courses set up. We have courses set up in New York is right around the corner, inshallah. We have another one coming very soon in Dallas, the Death and Barzakh course, which just FYI, if I was here in town at that time, I would be in that course myself. So if you're in town, make sure to attend that course. Shaykh Amin will be with you guys with that course, because that's a course that, like I said, I would want to attend myself. And I think we have another one actually in Chicago coming up as we speak. Things are being put together to make that happen as well. So thank you very much for being with us. If you haven't liked the Mizan Institute Facebook page, please do that. If anyone has a question, then you can always, or you wanted to give us feedback about the question that I just asked, I do see the comments coming in. Thank you very much. This makes my job a lot easier to know what what topic to choose. But if you're watching us later and you want to contribute to that, the feedback and your opinion, please do send a message into Mizan Institute's inbox, and we'll get back to you, inshallah. Thank you very much for being with us. With that, inshallah, we will end. I will see you guys, inshallah, the month of Ramadan. Like I mentioned, today was my last session. Shaykh Amin's sessions will continue, but my last session, just because, inshallah, we have to get ready for the month of Ramadan, as it's going to be a busy month of Ramadan coming up. Thank you very much. Inshallah, see you guys in the month of Ramadan. Wa alaikum assalam.